So, thank you for coming today. As your pins, or as my pin says, your vote matters. And one of our favorite slogans in the League of Women Voters this year is Oakland votes and votes informed. And so I'm here today to try to help inform you about the state ballot measures. I don't expect you to remember everything that I say. And in fact, what I'm going to say is not going to be the exhaustive information about these ballot measures. There isn't time for us to do that. But one of the reasons why I wanted Jennifer to be sure that you all had a copy of this list, that is a list of the measures that are on the ballot for people who live in Oakland, is because on the back of it is information about sources of additional information about the ballot measures, not only about the ballot measures, but also the candidates that will be on the ballot. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about the League of Women Voters and why I will only be talking about the ballot measures today. Our organization is about to turn 100 years old. We were founded in 1920 by the people across this nation who had worked so hard to get the passage of the measure of Amendment 19, which gave women the right to vote. That group of people were not only women, there were women and men who worked for suffrage, but the League of Women Voters chose the particular name because that amendment was going to, for the first time, give women the right to vote across the nation. They already were able to vote in California and Wyoming and some other states, but this was going to be nationally true, that women would be able to vote for the president, for their senators, and whatever. So, initially, our membership was just open to women, and the intent was to teach all these new voters how to vote. Not how to vote for particular things, but literally how to mark a ballot, how to register to vote, where the polls were going to be, the very basics of what do you do with this newfound right to vote. And then as time went on, we began to advocate for issues related to women and children in particular. So you say advocate. I thought that the League just did voter education. Well, that's what we're best known for, because that's why we're so visible before an election, is that we are known for our voter information and education. But from the very beginning, we have studied issues that were important to our communities. And if we were able, as members of the individual leagues, to come to consensus on a particular issue, we would develop a position. And from that position, then, we would advocate either for or against a piece of legislation. However, from the very beginning, we decided we were not going to align ourselves with one of the political parties. We were going to remain nonpartisan, which means we're not associated with any of the political parties. We are not aligned with their platforms, though sometimes it seems as if that's the case. But we've come independently to the positions that we have, and we act only on the basis of the positions we have as a result of having studied a particular issue. There was a line of thought that got away from me as I tried to finish that last sentence. Oh, I hope that doesn't happen too often today. So we advocate. So we are a 501c3 when we're doing our voter education. So donations to our education fund are tax deductible. When we are advocating, when we are saying, yes, pass this measure, or yes, pass that law, we are a 501c4. And so donations to the League of Women Voters of Oakland, in your form of your dues if you decide you'd like to join, or to any of our advocacy effects, are not tax deductible. So we wear two hats, we educate and we advocate. I didn't put this slideshow together, and I'm not sure why the person who did chose a party hat for our advocacy, but there you go, it differentiates things. Okay. So on the ballot in November, on the 6th of November, are 11 state propositions, 6 for Oakland, 2 for the Peralta Community Colleges, and 1 for the East Bay Regional Parks. And because we have just the hour to talk, I'm going to talk primarily about the state ballot measures, And then if there's time, I'll talk about the Peralta Community College measures and the East Bay Regional Park measure. There is lots of information about the Oakland ballot measures, and actually about all of the ballot measures around the county and around the state on a website called Voter's Edge. So if you didn't pick up a little bookmark for Voter's Edge as you came in, I encourage you to get one as you go out, because not only will you be able to read more about the ballot measures throughout the county, and if you're in the city of Alameda, for example, there are a couple of ballot measures. If you're in Berkeley, there are a whole bunch. If you're in Piedmont, there are 2, I believe, and so on and so forth. There are measures on the ballot. I don't have information about any of those local ballot measures except the Oakland ballot measures here today, but Voter's Edge will have information about all of them. And then the other thing that's special about Voter's Edge is that just as when the league does candidate forums or a meet the candidate event, every candidate who will be on the ballot in the state has been invited to have a free page on the League of Women Voters Voter's Edge website. So they are invited to log in and post information about their candidacy, just the bare minimum if they'd like to, or as much as they would like to within certain word limits. A league volunteer reviews what the candidate has posted to be sure that they've talked just about themselves and not about their opponents. And then if it passes muster, it's published, and then you can read about it. Not every candidate takes advantage of this invitation for a free website. So if you're looking for information about a particular candidate and it says that they have not submitted any information, feel free to use the function on Voter's Edge to tell your candidate that you wish they would post something about themselves. Some of the candidates feel that it's not necessary, that they're very well known in the community and that they don't need to post additional information, but we all know that there are always new voters and increasingly young voters turn to the web for their voter information. So look for Voter's Edge. So as I'm talking about measures today, I want to just give you a little word of caution. At one point for each measure, I will tell you what the supporters say and what the opponents say. Or if you're reading in your sample ballot from Alameda County about the measures, you'll see that certain people have signed the ballot measure arguments for and against each measure, and sometimes there are rebuttals. Just a little bit of caution. When people sign those arguments for and against, they're trying to convince you to vote for or against the measure. And so you need to use some judgment when you read those arguments. They're not necessarily 100% true. There's usually a kernel of truth in each argument, but you need to read carefully to be sure that what they are saying is actually true about the measure. And it's particularly important when you're looking at the television ads that are increasingly on the TV about the ballot measures. So the supporters and the opponents hope to gain your vote, and they may mislead or use scare tactics, not facts. So to help decide, we encourage you to pay attention who supports and who opposes each measure. One thing that's special about Voter's Edge is that the League of Women Voters of California Ed Fund has partnered with an organization called MapLight, and they have gained their reputation for being interested in following and reporting campaign finance information. So when you go to Voter's Edge and you read about the measures and you read about the candidates have posted their own information. We have, the League volunteers have posted the information about the ballot measures. MapLight has done the research to get the information about who's paying for this measure or who's paying to oppose it and how much money have they given. So that kind of information is there. All right, there are 11 measures that I'm going to try to talk about in the hour that we have today. And ideally, I would stop after each one and take questions. But if I do that, we'll be here for 3 or 4 hours, particularly if you have difficult questions. And some of the measures actually are very complicated. So I'm not going to take questions after every measure. I'll try to remember to stop about halfway through and take questions. But if you think of something as I'm talking that you'd like to ask about, make a note of that to yourself on one of the many pieces of paper that we've given you. And then when I'll stop talking for a few minutes and take questions, then you'll be able to ask the questions at that point. Okay, Proposition 1 on the state ballot are bonds for housing assistance. And they've this particular measure has been put on the ballot by the legislature. They are required to get the vote of the people for this bond measure. So what does it do? They will sell bonds that will raise money that can be used for housing assistance for 30,000 multifamily units, 7,500 farm worker units, and 3,000 homes for veterans. And you can see on your slide how the money will be divided as they sell those bonds. Most of the interest on these bonds will be paid back out of the general fund. And so there are fiscal implications for the state for these. However, the proceeds of the bonds that are used for veterans' homes or mortgages will be paid as the veterans themselves repay their mortgages. So there isn't a statewide effect of that part of the bond measure. Okay, so the fiscal effects. $3 billion will cost the general fund about $5.9 billion over 35 years as they pay the principal and the interest. And the $1 billion that's used for mortgages for veterans to buy homes will be paid off as they pay off their loans. So in support of Proposition number 1, you have Housing California, California Housing Consortium, State Construction Trades, Silicon Valley Leadership, California Homeless and Housing Coalition Action Fund. Why do you have the construction trades there? That's because the money will be provided to jurisdictions, cities, counties, in a bidding process, and then they will, and also to builders, and then the counties or the cities will apportion the money for the construction of the housing. And so the construction trades are interested in that idea that there's going to be more housing built and think that this would be a good bond to pass. In opposition, we've got Mr. Wesley, who's a lawyer who specializes in opposition research. And this is a good idea probably in some cases, because in some cases it may be that even the legislative analyst won't have appreciated all the implications of a bond. So you'll see Mr. Wesley's name a couple of times here. What are the arguments in favor or against? The supporters say that it'll provide housing relief, and oh my heavens, we know that the state of California has housing problems. It'll build housing and help people buy homes. It will honor veterans by helping them buy a home. The opponents say, but wait a minute, this doesn't help very many people, and repaying the bond will cost everybody in the state because the interest and the principal will come out of the general fund. Proposition 2, additional bonds, and this also was placed on the ballot by the legislature. So several years ago, here we go. In 2004, the voters approved Proposition 63, which imposed a 1% income tax on millionaires to fund mental health services. Then in 2016, a bill was passed by the legislature to spend $2 billion from that tax for supportive housing. And the idea of using $2 billion in supportive housing to call supportive housing mental illness treatment was challenged in court. And so if we pass this measure, that'll settle that court, because the voters now will have approved that using some of the money that is being raised for mental health services may be used for housing assistance. Okay. So the bill clarifies the voters' wishes, making the court case unnecessary, so services will be available sooner. You don't have to wait for this to work its way through the courts. So because the money is already coming in as a result of Proposition 63, there's no direct impact on the state budget. The bonds will be paid approximately in 30 years at 4.2% and so forth. So who is favoring this and who is against it? The people who are for it have contributed $2 million as of September 18th, and these figures I'm sure have changed since then. Affordable Housing Now, Housing California, the California Housing Consortium, state construction trades, Silicon Valley leadership, the California Homeless and Housing Coalition Action Fund. Those who are against it are a little bit surprising to some who know about NAMI. It's the leaders of the National Alliance on Mental Health Illness, or Mental Illness, NAMI, in Contra Costa. And I have a feeling that the reason why they're opposing this is described fully in the big note booklet that you'll receive from the State Secretary of State explaining the state measures. I unfortunately don't have that information in front of me is why they decided to, but it may be revealed actually in what the opponents say. So let's go on to that slide. The supporters say that these bonds will alleviate homelessness complicated by mental illness, and that supportive housing allows coordinated care for people who need treatment and stable housing. Funds are already earmarked for mental health services. The opponents say it spends dollars on buildings instead of other forms of treatment. I think this is probably the major reason why the NAMI of Contra Costa County is opposing this, that they are more in favor of other types of services than housing services. And that counties already actually use some of the proceeds from Proposition 63 for housing severely mentally ill patients. And then they add, the bill doesn't address restrictive zoning laws that often make it difficult to build neighborhood housing. So these are the arguments against. Let's go on to Proposition 3, which is a bond for water projects and is one of several bonds that have been on the ballot in recent years for water projects, each one with a slightly different focus. So this was put on the ballot by initiative, those petitions that you sign in front of the grocery store. It was not put on by the legislature. And that comes into play later when I'm talking about it. And what does it do? There was still bonds and to raise $8.9 billion to fund water infrastructure like dams, primarily, however, through cost sharing with local governments. So local governments will be able to apply to the state for some of the money that's raised by the sale of these bonds for specific water projects that they want to do. And it will be repaid from the general fund. There will be an oversight committee, a finance committee created for this bond measure, which will have a director of finance, a treasurer, and a controller. And most of the money, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, will be distributed to well, I didn't say this specifically. It'll be distributed to natural resources conservancies throughout the state. So those are the local agencies, or one type of local agency. So what would it do? The money would go towards providing affordable drinking water in low-income areas, removing pollutants, for example. It would repair reservoirs, including the Oroville Dam and the Kern Canal. It would go for wastewater treatment and recycling, for wetlands restoration, for flood protection in the Bay Area and elsewhere. It'll capture storm water runoff to refill the groundwater basins, big problem in Central Valley, and desalt groundwater. It'll raise money for watershed improvement to prolong water runoff, reduce fire danger, and remove invasive species. And it'll help habitat for fish and wildlife, including the Pacific Flyway. That all sounds pretty good. What are the fiscal effects? The repayment will cost about $17.3 billion. Local governments will share the project costs with the state, so when a local government applies for some of this money for a project, they may be required actually to have raised at least $1 for every dollar that they receive. Then local governments may save money due to cost sharing with the state funds. So who's contributing money for it and who against? $3.4 million has come from the agriculture and dairy against it. And these people have not contributed money as of September 18th towards defeating this measure, but the Sierra Club and the Central Solano Citizen Taxpayer Group. And what do the supporters and opponents say? The supporters say it'll help increase water supply from various sources, ensure safe drinking water to disadvantaged communities. Watershed restoration will improve water quality and protect agricultural interests. The opponents say California water bonds need planning and oversight by the legislature rather than through the initiative process. In other words, if it had gone through the legislature, it would have been in committee, there would have been testimony for and against there, and the legislators may have written this bond slightly differently than was written by the supporters of the bond, who are the ones who campaigned to put it on the ballot. So big waters, not the taxpayers, and those who cause the water problems should pay more of the cost. And it doesn't do enough to fix our California water shortage. So that's Proposition 3. Folks in the state, the pistachio growers, the Waterfowl Association, California for Safe Drinking Water, and the Northern California Water Association. And who is against it? And these people have not contributed money as of September 18th towards defeating this measure, but the Sierra Club and the Central Solano Citizen Taxpayer Group. And what do the supporters and opponents say? The supporters say it'll help increase water supply from various sources, ensure safe drinking water to disadvantaged communities. Watershed restoration will improve water quality and protect agricultural interests. The opponents say California water bonds need planning and oversight by the legislature rather than through the initiative process. In other words, if it had gone through the legislature, it would have been in committee, there would have been testimony for and against there, and the legislators may have written this bond slightly differently than was written by the supporters of the bond, who are the ones who campaigned to put it on the ballot. So big waters, not the taxpayers, and those who cause the water problems should pay more of the cost. And it doesn't do enough to fix our California water shortage. So that's Proposition 3. Prop 4, more bonds. These also were put on the ballot through signatures on petitions, the initiative process. What does Prop 4 do? It raises money for hospitals for children. $1.5 billion to renovate and expand buildings, as well as upgrade technology at hospitals that treat children. And most of the funding is reserved for 8 private, nonprofit hospitals and University of California hospitals. None of the money would go to your county hospitals. As background, the California Children's Hospital Association intermittently asks the taxpayers for help, and so in 2004 and 2008, there were bonds similar to this, which were passed by the voters. If this bond passes, there will be a finance committee created for this measure, and it'll have a director of finance, a treasurer, and a controller. The people who support it are the California Children's Hospital Association, which includes the hospitals, the 8 private nonprofit hospitals that were mentioned, and the California Teachers Association. Who is against it? The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and Mr. Wesley again. What are the supporters' arguments? It'll help over 2 million children a year. It leads to better health outcomes. These hospitals serve poor children. Previous bond dollars are almost used up to add beds and buy new technology. The opponents say, we'll have to raise taxes or take money from other things to pay the interest. Taxpayers shouldn't pay for private hospitals. Hospitals can take out their own bonds. First, improve the entire health system to lower the medical costs. The fiscal effects for Proposition 4, it'll cost $2.9 billion to pay the original bond of $1.5 billion and interest of $1.4 billion. I think maybe this might be a good time to stop, because we've talked now about 4 bonds, and we're going to go on to other types of measures. Do you have any questions about Propositions 1, 2, 3, or 4? 3 or 4? Yes.
I had a question about Proposition 2.
Okay.
If we're adding already existing MHSA programs?
I think that the legislation that was passed in 2016 actually indicated that they felt that some of the money that was coming from the tax should be spent on supportive housing. And I don't know, I'm guessing that in the big booklet that you'll get from the Secretary of State will show how the current money has been distributed up until now. Okay, and I don't know the answer, but I have a feeling that yes, probably some of the money that's currently being used for other types of treatment would be taken for housing, but maybe not. Okay. Any other questions on Props 1 through 4? Okay, let's go on to Proposition number 5. Those of you who are homeowners probably remember Proposition 13, which was passed back in 1978, and which has held tax increases to, has sort of reined in tax increases and controlled them because they're controlled on a state level rather than the counties setting their own tax rates. But there's some chafing under Proposition 13, and this ballot measure has been put on the ballot by collecting signatures, and I think by law. No, it's a constitutional amendment, so it would establish a new law and they would amend the Constitution, but it was put on by collecting signatures. And what does it do? It allows older or disabled homeowners to take their lower property tax base that results from Proposition 13 to a new home anywhere in California. Proposition 13 is written so that counties have to buy into allowing homeowners to take their lower tax base into each county. So each county has to set up a process by which a person moving from one county to another may take that lower tax rate. And currently there are only 11 counties in the state that allow that. And this would change that. That would say you could move anywhere in the state and take your lower tax rate to your new county. The other change is that it allows purchase of a home of lesser or greater value. The current law only says that if what you buy somewhere else is of lesser value, you can take your tax break with you. This says even if you buy something that's more expensive, you can also take that tax break with you. Okay? Though the tax would be raised, it wouldn't be the same as it had been on the previous property. It would reflect the fact that you're buying something that's more expensive, but you would be allowed to apply it to a house that is more expensive than what you've sold. I think maybe I've said all of this already. What I'll just point out to you is that the California Association of Realtors, people who sell homes, have introduced this as a way to address the state's housing shortage because they think that it'll encourage seniors to move if they have these additional advantages. Okay, well there's some cost to changing the Prop 13 this way, and these are the estimated costs. That it may lead to a loss of $2 billion annually in lowered tax revenue for local governments and schools. For local governments, the implication will be at first, it will cut local revenue by about $100 million a year, but that could grow over the years. More sales would generate property tax transfers of tens of millions of dollars, but county administrative costs would rise by tens of millions of dollars at first. Schools would be affected because the annual reduction in school revenue would begin at about $100 million and grow to $1 billion. School losses may be offset by more state funding, but then state costs would go up. So, a little catch-22 going on here. So, those who are in favor of this have contributed $7.2 million to pass Proposition 5. Primarily the California Association of Realtors and the National Association of Realtors. Those who are against it are educators, public safety and healthcare groups, and the California Teachers Association, the people who feel that they will be impacted by the lower county taxes, property taxes, and money going to the school from Prop 13 or from property taxes that are currently collected. So what do the supporters and the opponents say? More houses will become available for younger families if we can persuade seniors to move. Older adults on fixed income need this kind of protection. And it protects Prop 13 tax reductions. It does not take away those protections that Prop 13 put in. Opponents say that essential local services and schools will be affected if this is enacted, that the loss of local revenue will become worse every year, and some seniors already receive some Prop 13 protection. But I explained to you the greater protection that they would get if this passes. That's Prop 5. Prop 6, road repair and fuel taxes, and this was put on the ballot again by collecting signatures. So what does it do? Its primary thing is that it's going to repeal the 2017 legislation, SB 1, which increased gas and other fuel taxes, as well as car fees for transportation costs. The other major impact is that it would require voter approval for any similar taxes in the future. In other words, the people who support this are unhappy that the legislature actually passed the tax measure, SB 1, that's raising money to repair our roads and bridges, as opposed to the voters having voted for it, okay? So let's look at what SB 1 does, because Prop 6 would repeal it. When SB 1 was put into effect, the gas tax hadn't been raised in 15 years, and so SB 1 calls for raising the gas tax by 12 cents a gallon initially, and 20 for gasoline, and 20 cents a gallon for diesel, with future adjustments for inflation. And currently, the tax money from SB 1 is allocated as is shown on your chart. State bridges and culverts, county road work, state transportation, and so on and so forth. The fiscal effects of Proposition 6, if it passes, would be to cut the transportation tax revenues from $4.4 billion to $2 billion in 2018-19. And after that, the transportation tax will not increase per inflation, so effectively it'll be smaller each year. According to the legislative analyst, the cuts will affect state highway maintenance, local streets and roads, as well as mass transit. So the money that's collected in taxes from SB 1 not only is spent by Caltrans, but also money is made available to counties and cities for local and countywide road repair and maintenance. The new requirement that most transportation-related taxes must be approved by voters, which would happen if Prop 6 passes, and this would be in addition to 2/3 of the legislators voting for the particular tax, is that it'll make it more difficult to fund transportation costs in the future. Here's a little chart to show you comparison. Are our gasoline taxes higher than others? Because this is one of the arguments that those who are in favor of Prop 6 say. And certainly, if you look at that top line, the state excise tax in California is almost twice as much as other states' average. Federal excise tax is the same. Underground storage fee is something that we've added in there. The subtotal, yes, taxes are higher in California, but the sales tax and fees are lower. And if you look at the miles of roads in the state, it's obvious that California is second in the country in the miles of road that we have to keep repaired. So maybe there's some justification for higher taxes. I think that's why this chart was inserted in this presentation. Okay, Prop 6. People who are for it have contributed $3.5 million. And there are this group of people, an organization called Repeal the Gas Tax, Reform California, which is an anti-tax group, the Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and U.S. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, the Republican Party, and the National Federation of Independent Businessmen. Those who are against repealing SB 1 have raised $26 million to try to retain it, to oppose Proposition 6. And the bulk of the money that's been contributed has come from bridge safety, business, labor, local governments, and transportation advocates, Governor Brown, Mayor Garcetti of Los Angeles, and the California Chamber of Commerce. So those are the people who are against Proposition 6. And What do the supporters and the opponents say? Gas taxes and fees are too high, and they fall hardest on working incomes and are unnecessary with a budget surplus. Some dollars of the tax increase will be diverted to non-road related projects, including parks and training for formerly incarcerated felons through the Workforce Development Board. Tax increases on gasoline that directly affect people's lives are too big for just the governor and the legislature to decide. The opponents say there are more than 1,600 bridges and overpasses that are structurally unsafe in our state. 89% of the counties have poor roads. Roads with potholes and cracks are a major safety threat. Reliable roads are critical to get Californians to work and move goods and service. And requiring voter approval of fuel taxes already passed by 2/3 of the legislature will make it harder to fund transportation projects. Those are the arguments for and against. It's not an easy decision. What your vote means: yes, if you vote for Prop 6, it will cut the gasoline tax and cut dollars for road repair. If you vote no on the Proposition 6, it will keep the current tax rate, that's the increased 12 cents per gallon this year, and keep the current number of dollars for road repair. So that's for and against Proposition 6. Proposition 7 actually won't change anything for us immediately. It's to allow changes to be made in the future if we decide to do it. So what it does, it moves towards the possibility of California having year-round daylight savings time if 2/3 of the legislature vote to do it and there is a change in the federal law. And the background is that in 1949, the federal and California law set daylight saving time in summer, standard time in winter. Federal law allows year-round standard time as Hawaii and Arizona use it if a state wants it, but not year-round daylight savings time. So you can stick with standard time, but you can't have daylight saving time all year round according to federal law. So the background, year-round standard summer evenings are shorter. Year-round daylight saving time, sunrises later on winter mornings. And how did it get on the ballot? Legislative changes that this would institute legislative changes that require voter approval. So the legislator put it on the ballot. As of now, there are no fiscal effects. Those who are for it are Representative Kansan Chu, Democrat of Assembly District, no, maybe that's Congress, District 25, Representative Lorena Gonzalez, Congressional District 80, and I don't know whether that's Cheyenne or Cyan Roy, who's a cardiologist. Against doing this is Senator Jim Nielsen, Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, and Philip Chen. The arguments for and against. The supporters say, per medical studies, heart attack risk increases during time changes. So let's not have this change. I mean, we've all experienced sort of feeling a little off kilter during that change period. The twice yearly change increases electricity used by 4% and fuel used by cars and costs $434 million. Who knew? Opponents say the US tried year-round daylight savings time in 1974 due to the energy crisis, and people hated getting up in the dark in the morning. And there's no conclusive studies that year-round daylight savings time actually saves energy or money. So those are the arguments for and against this. Not your major issue this year, probably. Okay, Proposition 8. Kidney dialysis charges, and you're seeing a lot of ads on the TV these days for and against this one these days. So it was put on by initiative. They collected signatures to put this on the ballot, and what it does, it requires the companies that operate dialysis clinics, that is the ones that treat kidney failure, to pay back to insurers any profits over 15% of their qualifying business costs. So if they make a lot of money, that's higher than 15% of their qualifying business products, they have to pay that back to the insurance companies. And it allows the courts, however, to increase what qualifies as business costs. history. The dialysis in California is a $3 billion a year business. Most dialysis is paid for by Medicare and Medi-Cal at lower rates. However, private insurers pay much higher rates, and it's probably those insurers who are looking to get some money. Two companies, Fresenius Medical Care and DaVita Kidney Care, own most of the California's 588 dialysis units. Those who are in favor of this have contributed $7.9 million, and they are the Service Employees International, SEIU. And when you see the arguments for and against, you'll understand why. Those who are contributing money against it are the kidney dialysis people, Fresenius Medical Care of North America and DaVita Kidney Care. So what do the supporters and the opponents say? The supporters say, and this is an argument that some of the other people who are doing pros and cons presentations question the validity of, but that it will provide an incentive for dialysis companies to lower their costs and improve patient care. Somewhat roundabout thinking there, I think, maybe, but I'm not sure. Insurance costs will go down if dialysis costs less, so the first has to be true in order for the second to be true. And these companies overcharge patients and resist unionization of workers. So that's why the SEIU is in favor of that. Opponents say it sets arbitrary limits on what insurance companies pay for dialysis, which won't cover all the costs. And clinics will cut back or close, so patients will have less access to care. So those are the arguments for and against. The fiscal effects, well, it's a little hard to determine this because it really depends on how the clinics respond if Prop 8 passes and where the allowable costs are eventually set. So company profits, if this passes, likely will decrease, and healthcare costs likely will decrease also. Proposition 9 was going to ask us whether we wanted to divide the state of California into 3 parts, and it was decided that this was not an appropriate thing to be on the ballot at this point, that it wasn't constitutional for us to be voting on this particular version of dividing California into 3 points. So we go to Prop 10, and this is another one where we're having a lot of ads on TV right now. This was put on the ballot by collecting signatures, and it deals with rent control. And what does it do? It repeals a 1995 state law so that it will allow cities and counties to expand rent control. However, landlords must still be allowed a fair rate of return. So background, under the 1995 Costa-Hawkins law, landlords can freely raise rents for single-family homes, apartments built since 1996, and for new tenants, okay? So there's no rent control for those. However, cities do, in some places, limit rent increases on apartments built before 1995. This new law, if it passes, would allow cities and counties, if they wish to enact ordinance to do so, could limit rent increases on single-family homes, apartments built since 1996, and new tenants. So who supports this and who opposes it? The folks who are for Prop 10 are AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the American Federation of Government Employees, the California Nurses Association, the Democratic Party in California, Mayor Garcetti of Los Angeles, California Teachers Association, and California SEIU. Against it, California Rental Housing Association, that's the housing association that supports people who are in the business of renting. California Apartment Association, business, tax, and veterans groups. The California Republican Party. And what are the arguments for and against? Supporters say that this will allow communities to decide what makes sense for their housing issues. It could protect seniors, families, and others with low or fixed income. Opponents say it leads to less rental property because landlords will stop renting and building will be discouraged. It will allow the creation of new local bureaucracies with power to regulate rents on all types of residential property. The fiscal effects, and again, this depends so much on what happens if this passes. If Prop 10 passes, it doesn't say automatically that cities and counties that don't currently have rent control are going to introduce rent control. It just allows them to do that. And it allows them to do it on more of the rental property than is currently possible. So we don't know how counties and cities are going to respond, though we've got a fairly good feeling for that there are, I think, some rent control ballot measures on the ballot this November. There's one in Oakland. So the fiscal effects, the impact is difficult to predict because it depends on specific rent control ordinances and on the reaction of the landlords and the tenants. With more rent control, landlords will have less income on which to pay taxes. The value of rental housing increases more slowly, so over time property values and tax revenues are lower. And overall, state and local governments' tax revenue can be cut by 10 to 100 millions of dollars per year. The losses could be less or more. It just depends on what ordinances are put in place as a result of this relaxation in the laws. Proposition 11 affects ambulance employees, and it was put on the ballot by initiative. And what it does, it allows private ambulance services, the people who own the ambulances, to require their workers to remain on call during meal and rest breaks at a regular pay rate. It also provides additional training and some paid mental health services. So this is the background for why this measure is on the ballot. The state Supreme Court ruled 2 years ago that security guards don't have to remain on call during meal or break times. The EMT industry wants workers to remain on duty. A number of private ambulance firms face class action lawsuits in California courts over break time violations, including the American Medical Response Company, which is backing this measure and it owns a lot of the ambulances in the country. And so why is it on the ballot? Company and employees were not able to work out a solution, so it's going to be put to the voters. Who is for this? American Medical Response, the company that owns a lot of ambulances. Who's against it? The California Teachers Association. And again, this is as the middle of September. If you're interested in who's supporting and opposing, you can find that information on Voter's Edge, and I think the FPPC also reports this kind of information. And what are the arguments for and against? Supporters for Prop 11 says that it retains the long-standing industry practice of paying medical personnel to be on call during their breaks and not be paid at time and a half, for example. It's essential that emergency personnel can respond quickly during mass casualty events, and the Prop 11 will require additional training to meet the emergency standards. And interestingly enough, no arguments have been filed, no formal arguments have been filed against Proposition 11. Fiscal effects. It saves providers and thus local governments from the costs of more ambulances to cover off-duty breaks, and potentially over $1 million annually will be saved, but that's a relatively small percent of the overall cost of having ambulance services available. It might require providers to have more ambulances in some areas. It would increase the cost of training for companies that don't yet offer the required level. It would cost tens of millions of dollars a year. And those are the fiscal effects. Okay. Proposition 12, the confinement of farm animals, and this one is starting to have some ads on TV now. If you liked Proposition 2 in 2008, you'll really like Proposition 12. What does it do? It places new size requirements on the coops and cages that contain breeding pigs, veal calves, and egg-laying hens. It requires that all egg-laying hens be raised in specified cage-free conditions and applies to related food products that are sold in California, even if the farms are out of state. Okay. The background, Proposition 2 of 2008 requires that farm animals can stand up and turn around in their cages, but this new measure would have specific square foot requirements and a few additional measures. So the fiscal effects, initially perhaps higher business costs to build new pens, which would decrease state income tax, and there would be enforcement which could cost up to $10 million a year. Oh, I read it off of the wrong slide, sorry. That's what I was just telling you about, and the arguments for and against. People who are for Prop 12 are the Humane Society of the United States, the Humane Society Legislative Fund, the American Society for Prevention for Cruelty to Animals, and 33 animal rights organizations. Against it is an organization which generally opposes animal welfare legislation called the Humane Farming Action. And the arguments for and against. Supporters say that this will strengthen and clarify farm anti-cruelty law. It'll prevent egg-laying hens, breeding pigs, and veal calves from being housed inhumanely in small cages all their lives, and it'll reduce the risk of human illness from factory farming. Opponents say it could cause price increases for eggs, pork, and veal. 2020 is too soon for it to have to be in effect. It may lead to shortages. Court or legislative challenges from other states that don't conform could cost California, and it's not a truly cruelty-free alternative. So those are the state measures. Let's stop for just a moment, and if you have any questions about the state measures 5 through 12, I'd be glad to take those questions now, and then if there's time or if you want to stay, I'll talk about some regional measures. Yes?
Was there, thank you. I thought that there was some proposal or limit where when something is really against something, it has to be a no or a yes. And these seem kind of upside down because there were is that true? And then, okay, I thought I remembered that. And then there's an upside down because they're repealing laws that, so like if you're for
repealing the law, yeah.
You know, if you're for transportation money, then you got to vote no on the ballot. And I was just wondering.
And unfortunately, I am not familiar with whether or not a law was passed. Vote means, I'm sorry, but it certainly is confusing on Measure 6.
I want to let people get to a couple other questions, but I see that a few people have to leave, and so I wanted to just acknowledge our amazing video crew, Futures Explored. They run a program that does filmmaking training for people with developmental disabilities, and they also offer production services. Amazingly, they're filming this, and we're going to be able to upload it onto our website, so for folks who weren't able to make this presentation, we can make that available. And they have a really cool new streaming service called Inclusion Networks. Check it out. They are streaming a lot of the content that is created by Futures Explored. I do want to just acknowledge that I'm going to send out the slides from this presentation after October 10th, when we'll have the Creekside presentation from a different chapter of League of Women Voters. And then just that if anyone is interested for their own staff or program to have a presentation like this, the League of Women Voters really is amazing. They offer these free presentations for groups of 12 or more. So you can ask me for information, or you can look up the contact information. They do it by chapter, so it depends on where you want the presentation. So we have this room reserved for a little while longer, and if you have the energy to take more questions, then I will keep us going.
Before too many other people leave, I just wanted to call out a couple of things. The League is a membership organization. We rarely have any paid staff. We're all volunteers. The State League and the National League have paid staff, but all the local leagues all run on volunteers. And we love additional members because it means there are additional people who might be interested in doing some of the things that we do, particularly around elections. And also on the back table is a little document that we produced that's another part of our voter education. It tells you how to contact the people who represent you. This one is specifically for the City of Oakland. There are 6 Leagues of Women Voters in Alameda County. So in addition to the League of Women Voters of Oakland, there is one in the city of Alameda. There is one that serves Berkeley, Albany, and Emeryville. There is one that is the Eden Area League that serves Castro Valley, San Leandro, Hayward, San Lorenzo. There is the Fremont, Newark, Union City League, so South County League, and the League of Women Voters of Piedmont is the 6th in Alameda County. There used to be one out in the Livermore-Amador Valley, but they've gone out of business. So if you live out that way and think that it would be good to have a league again, there are people who are working towards that. We just haven't formally acknowledged them as a league yet. So thank you so much for listening. And I do have slides about Oakland measures, but in particular, if you're interested in the regional measures, there are 2 having to do with the Peralta Community College District and one that has to do with the East Bay Park District. So.
Yeah, so if folks, does anyone have a question before we end, or you can just, yes, thank you to Bonnie Hamlin. I guess if you have questions, please stay to ask the questions, and I'll send out all the slides with the regional measure information, everything, so that our entire staff of public health can have that information. So, thank you.
So a couple of you are still sitting here. Does that mean that you'd like me to talk about the regional measures? Because I'd be glad to do that if you would. Okay, good. So the Peralta Community College District has put 2 measures on the ballot, both to raise additional money for the district. The first one is Measure E, and it will renew a parcel tax that is already in effect. In other words, those of you who are property owners will see that you are paying a small property tax. The monies go to the Peralta Community College District, and the money is specified for academic expenses, not for staff or buildings. And what the Peralta Community College District is asking us is to extend that parcel tax by passing Measure E. And it'll renew the parcel tax for 4 years. The arguments for, or the people who are for and against this, Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee is for it. Tony Cook, who is on the retired Peralta College's instructor, is in favor of it. And Jordan, who is a student trustee of the Peralta Community College District, is for this. And against it is a man who was appointed to be the chairperson of the Citizens Oversight Committee for the parcel tax. As I mentioned earlier, frequently when a proposition is raising money for something, the wording of the measure itself will specify that there needs to be a sort of a citizens watchdog committee that will keep an eye on how the money is being spent to assure that the money is being spent the way the proposition said it would be. Okay? So Mr. Mills was the former chairperson from 2015 to 18 of the Citizens Oversight Committee for the parcel tax, and he is against this measure, and you'll see why in his arguments. Supporters say it doesn't raise taxes. You're already paying this parcel tax. It will just extend it for 4 more years. The money must be spent on student support rather than pay basic costs of education, so that's a good thing. Protects affordable higher education and job preparation, and again, the dollars can't be spent on administrators' salaries. Opponents say the Oversight Committee has been concerned since 2015 that the dollars are not being spent as promised. And so they suggest first improve transparency in the Peralta Community College District on how the money's being spent, and then return the measure to the ballot. This doesn't expire until 2020, so they would have the 2020 election in which to put this on the ballot. And the Watchdog Committee says you need better reporting before you approve more taxes. So that's that measure. Measure G is the other measure for Peralta Community College, and this is for education bonds. Usually when you have bonds, it means there are going to be some capital improvements. The money is going to go for buildings, not for people. Well, indirectly for people, but anyway. So what it does is it institutes an additional parcel tax, because this is how you pay the investors who want to buy these bonds and repay the interest. So parcel tax of $24.50 per 100,000 assessed value. The bond money will be used for upgrading old classrooms, upgrading technology and science labs, expanding job training classrooms, for seismic upgrades, repair, and new facilities. It cannot be used for administrators' salaries, and it can't be used for audits or citizens' oversight. That function the money will have to come from somewhere else. So no money so far as of the 20th of September, the 19th of September, has been spent for and against these, but my guess is that there's some money out there being spent. Barbara Lee is in favor of this, and Andres Kluver, who is a foundation board member for the Peralta College's foundation. And there are no listed opponents, no formal arguments have been filed against Measure G. Supporters say technology updates for better employment opportunities, replace seismic unsafe classrooms and repair leaky roofs, and no arguments against it have been filed. Then there's one other measure for the Park District. If you'd like me to do that, I'm going to have to flip through a bunch of slides quickly, but there is another measure if you'd like me to talk about that. Okay, so excuse me, these are all the Oakland measures, and all of this will be available to you if they post this on the website. So, regional measures, there is one. It's measure number FF, and people who live in the part of the Park District that is going to benefit from this, which is the western portion of the Park District, will extend a current residential parcel tax for another 20 years. Currently, single-family homes pay $1 a month or $12 a year, and multiple family units pay 69 cents a unit per month or $8.28 a month. Here's a map of the Park District, and all those green blobs are the East Bay Regional Parks. And the part of the district that this measure will benefit are the parks within, west of 680. And yeah, west of 680. The blobs that are to the left of all the major red line. Thank you. Those are the parks, right? Yeah, good. All right. So this money will be collected and spent in the western zone of the park, and it'll protect against wildfires, preserve water quality, shorelines and creeks, restore natural areas and old park facilities, protect redwoods, improve public safety and environmental education, and deal with climate change. People who are for this include the Sierra Club, the group Save the Redwoods, Golden Gate Audubon, League of Women Voters of the Bay Area, Alameda County Fire, Contra Costa Labor Council, Citizens for East Shore Parks, and Oakland Chamber of Commerce. Those who are against this measure are the Forest Action Brigade, the East Bay Pesticide Alert, Save East Bay Hills, San Francisco Alliance, and the Fire and Cancer Survivors. And when you see the arguments, you'll understand, I think, why they're saying that. Supporters say it provides fire protection, public safety and access, provides environment and habitat protection, and so forth. The opponents say, don't thin and cut eucalyptus trees for fire management. This is a group of people who feel that that eucalyptus trees are getting a bad rap, that they're not as flammable, they're not as problematic as some studies seem to show. They go on to say some invasive species are more drought tolerant than some natives. So just because it's an invasive species doesn't mean it should be taken out. And they say, please don't use chemicals to clear invasive species. And they go on to say that this measure lacks a complete plan to repopulate areas that are cleared. So if they remove invasive species, it doesn't have a clear plan for replanting. So those are the arguments for and against. And this slide says that there are more materials on the table, which I think are still there. And the last one says, thank you for coming, and gives you our website. There's lots more information on the back of the piece of paper that had the list of ballot measures, and take you to all sorts of wonderful websites. So thanks for your attention, and I hope it is helpful. Yeah, we're glad to do this.